Hello, I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today and join this conference on trauma and transformation. And I want to talk to you about how we can use science in that context. We live in an ever more complex world. For example, we have a global economy, sometimes that's fragile. We have the challenge of climate change, of population growth, food security, dealing with poverty, and of course scarce natural resources. So to be able to cope with that, we need to use science, engineering and technology as a tool in foreign policy. For example, if we look at scientific and technical complexity, not one single country is able to tackle big challenges alone. Climate change is a good example of that. We need to effectively crowdsource information globally. The other thing that we have with science is that the natural laws of the universe apply equally well to all nations. So the language of science is truly universal. And science, ideally, should always be transparent and also ideology-free. That makes science a soft power then. We can use it to solve or even avoid conflict. And this allows us to build up trust between nations. It allows us to discuss and exchange ideas regardless of political or cultural or religious backgrounds. So that brings me to science diplomacy. And there are three strands in science diplomacy. The first, diplomacy for science. The second, science in diplomacy. And the third, science for diplomacy. First, diplomacy for science. Here we're looking at common research policies or initiatives which allow us to work globally in a cooperative way. And a good example of that would be the International Council for Science, ICSU, set up in 1931, which promotes international science collaboration. Another good example, the Global Research Council, again coordinating science and science funding internationally. And then we have just some of the most innovative and iconic science collaborations, such as the International Space Station or the European Southern Observatory and the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, which allows us to look at our universe and brings together scientists from all over the world. Now, the second strand, science in diplomacy, here is looking more at global governance. So we can hope to enforce foreign policy objectives using scientific advice. And a great example of that, and a very current one, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which advises on policy to do with climate change. And of course, we have the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007, which was won by the IPCC, recognising that achievement. The third strand, science for diplomacy. Here we can use science to help build up trust between nations, and we can use the science cooperation to improve international relationships between countries. And a very good example of this would be CERN, which overcame the political differences in Europe after the Second World War to be able to look at particle physics. And another example, during the Cold War in 1975, we saw the docking of an Apollo and a Soyuz space module. And so science overcame those other ideological difficulties. What we need is to raise the profile of science diplomacy. We need to highlight what science can do for diplomacy. And this means really mainstreaming science in European Union foreign policies. An example of this might be the governance of international spaces, such as the Arctic and the Antarctic, the high seas, the deep sea floor, and outer space. And we also need to think about promoting science as a development tool within foreign countries, for example, via the African Academies of Science. So we need to find the right synergies between European national initiatives and also EU activities, so we get real added value. Science is a tremendously powerful tool. From the knowledge of the very small elements that we are made up out of, to the limits of our knowledge of the universe, Science really is all about us. It's about people, and sharing it is key. Thank you very much.